So this is a tale of scientific discovery and new digital technologies that unravel secrets of time capsules that are locked up in museum storerooms around the world. Some of them have been undiscovered for hundreds of years. It's also a story about us, you and I, the museum visiting public, and how we can share in and explore these discoveries for ourselves. We are going to look at some really curious things. A mummy murder mystery, a rogue Martian meteorite, and a golden falcon that we have found deep inside the bandages of a 2,500-year-old Egyptian mummy. It all started about 10 years ago. I was driving my son to school, my youngest son, and he turns around to me and says, "What are you working on at the moment, Dad?" And I'm a computer visualization specialist. That means I help people take complex digital data and turn it into something comprehensible using computer graphics. We just started working with the British Museum, and in particular, a Dr. John Taylor, who is one of the world's leading experts in Egyptology. And we were about to scan a 3,500-year-old mummy named Nez Perrenub. I'll say that again, Nez Perrenub, because apparently every time you say the mummy's name, it extends his life in the afterlife. Actually, let's try something. Can we all do that together? Because I want to give him a really good boost. So I will say it first, and then all of you say it afterwards. Nez Perrenub. Nez Perrenub. So my son somehow managed to persuade me to come and speak to his class at school. Terrifying. And to my eternal gratitude, Dr. Taylor offered to come and speak as well. So imagine the scene where you have a class of 8-year-olds listening with wide-eyed wonder to one of the world's leading authorities in Egyptology, and especially in mummies. And it was their infectious enthusiasm that persuaded us to go ahead and create a new exhibition, a public exhibition at the museum called Mummy Inside Story. And while we used a 3D film, what we really wanted to do was create an experience which was totally interactive, something that the public could go and explore for themselves. But unfortunately, it just wasn't possible because the technology at the time to do this looked like that. 3 refrigerators worth of equipment. So fast forward 10 years, and I find myself fortunate enough to be working with some of the pioneers in medical imaging and 3D visualization. They had developed a technology which was called a virtual autopsy table, which basically allowed forensic scientists to look at the human body in incredible detail. And they could do this interactively. It was very easy to use. And for that reason, they gave it the name the Inside Explorer. And these are the sort of images that you work with on this type of system. It's okay, we're a fair distance after lunch, so it's not too bad. Now, they had also just started to install these systems into museums and science centers around the world to educate about human anatomy. So this is starting to interact with the public. So this is what we needed 10 years ago, right? This is what we really wanted to use on that original project. So things have really moved on in the last 10 years. You can now scan a human body, a complete full body scan in 2 seconds. It's so fast, it's amazing. That computer, which was 3 refrigerators long, will now fit under this desk. It costs 0.25% of the price 10 years ago and is way more powerful. And new visualization techniques have enabled the human body to be visualized like never before. So we took it back to the British Museum, and we did some demonstrations in the storerooms underground. In fact, it was the Egyptian storeroom. So these demos were surrounded by sarcophagi and papyri and amazing things like that. It was very cool. I had a great time, actually. So, to their eternal credit, the museum just got it straight away. They said, this is fantastic. Let's start a new project. So, when I say Egyptian mummies, what do you think of? What do you imagine? Bandages, hieroglyphs, maybe the odd scary movie. Well, this also is an Egyptian mummy. He is what is known as a natural mummy, and he is buried in hot sand. Well, he was buried in sand, which was hot because of the sun, and he was naturally mummified. He comes from an area called Gabalaon, which is just opposite Luxor, the other side of the Nile, which means Twin Peaks, and he's known as Gabalaon Man. He's also extremely old. He's 5,500 years old, and very, very well preserved. So he's extraordinarily rare. And you can find him in the British Museum at Gallery 64, which is the early Egypt gallery. And he's in a glass case, and he is one of the most popular exhibits in the museum itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the technology, which we brought along today, to give you a much closer look at Gabalaon Man. Okay, so we're now, this is all very interactive. So we're now on the touchscreen system, and we have just one small box under here, but it's really powerful. And this is the system, and it allows us to actually look at different cases. So you can load up whichever case you like. In this case, we're going to load up Gabalaon Man. So we're actually loading in all of that data from the scanner, and that's produced this image here. But this is not just an image. This is completely interactive. And we can rotate, and we can move side to side, and we can zoom. You see these information points here, which tell us a little bit about Gabalaon Man and some of the interesting things. But we also have this control up here, which allows us to cut into the body. Okay? So this is totally interactive, as you can see. And I'm going to cut the top of his head off, as one does. And we're going to look inside. And you can see immediately that he has a brain. Well, this is relatively rare for mummies to have a brain, because as you may be aware, as you might have been taught in school all those years ago, that the brain was removed as part of the mummification process. But this is way before all of that. This is actually pre-dynastic. So 5,500 years is 2,000 years before all the normal mummification processes were developed. And it is thought that Gabalaon Man, or someone like him, might well have been the inspiration for what followed 2,000 years later, to recreate that mummification process, which nature had done almost accidentally. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to peel away some layers. And those of you who are sensitive disposition, look away. But I'm going to peel away his skin, and then take us down to the muscle tissue, and eventually down to the skeleton. Now, when you go and look at Gabalaon Man in his glass case, you don't see him like this. He is actually, as we saw in the original image. But once we get down to this level, there are many things we can discover about him. You can see already that he has wonderful teeth. He was pretty healthy, actually. Fantastic teeth, in fact. And you can see also that he has very strong forearms. So he probably would have been used to doing a lot of lifting. And from his fusion lines here on the top of his arm bone, you can see that actually he would have been about between 18 and 20 years old. So what is a young, fit, healthy man doing in a shallow grave? And that was the puzzle that the museum had. So we're going to take a look at one particular spot here where there is a mark. And I'm going to just cut through here from the bottom of his body. So we expose his chest. And inside, we can see that there's something going on here, particularly in this area. If I actually switch to soft tissue, you'll see that becomes really visible. So this point here is where his rib has been shattered. And you can see that it is right underneath where that mark was. So it looks as though Galilean man has actually been stabbed in the back. And it looks as though this would have been quite a violent death. So this was really quite a major discovery. So the point of discovery was really important. This is actually a really interesting photograph. It was taken a few moments before this discovery of cause of death was made. And it's really quite unusual for this to happen. And we actually have all the key people around the table here. We have the technology, and we have this wonderful data set from this wonderful subject of Galilean man. And something magical happens when you bring all of these things together, and discoveries get made. So the museum decided at this point that they wanted to bring this to the public as well. It was not just for the scientists, it was not just for the anthropologists, it was not just for the Egyptologists, but it was for you, for the public. And here the system is now running in the Gallery 64. And we're talking about a museum here which is 255 years old. This is quite an innovation, and it really has led the world in what they're doing. So where did we take this next? Well, we took it to the Natural History Museum in London, and we started to look at a whole different range of subjects. And the Natural History Museum is unique in so much as they have their own science imaging team, and they also have a very cool scanner called a micro-CT scanner, which allows you to look at much smaller objects, but to really, really fine detail. So we're going to take a look at one of those now, quickly, and I'm going to load up a meteorite. This is a Martian meteorite. It fell to Earth in 2011 in the Moroccan desert, in an area called Tissant. And that's why it's known as the Tissant meteorite. And it's thought that it was blasted off the surface of Mars probably about 700,000 years ago by a crater impact. And it's probably been spinning around for 700,000 years, and eventually it decides to land in the Moroccan desert. It's one of the most valuable objects in the museum, and you can find it in the vault. This is actually a tiny fragment of it. So when we're looking at it this large, it's just a small fragment. Now what I'm going to do is actually do some color enhancement on the composition. And this is how they found out that actually it came from Mars, is because of the composition. And if I now cut in, you can start to see the mineral structure inside. So this consists of olivine, feldspar glass, and pyroxene. But of course, well, you all knew that, right? So I'm going to do something kind of cool. And I like this because it is very definitely a collision of different areas, different worlds, if you like. We're going to use a technique which I call X-ray specs. That's the technical term. And this was a technique that was originally developed for forensic scientists for looking in autopsies, virtual autopsies, for looking for gas pockets inside the human body. We thought it'd be kind of cool to apply it to meteorites and rocks to see what would happen. And look what happened. You will just see in the center here that we have a couple of voids. I'm going to cut virtually through one of those voids. And we'll go back to solid. Just wipe that back. This is so cool to be able to do this. And you'll see that there is a hole inside the rock. That means there's a real possibility that 700,000-year-old Martian gas is trapped inside. Imagine what that could tell us about the world of Mars all that time ago. And that was all for free. Didn't have to send a rocket. NASA likes free. Okay. All right. So, we've looked at some really weird and wonderful stuff with the Natural History Museum, and I couldn't resist showing a few more things because they are just so very, very cool. This doesn't look that cool because it looks like a boring rock. But if actually we do the wipe and we do look inside, we find a 350 million year old arachnid fossil. That's a kind of like a pre-spider. And that's 80 million years before the dinosaurs. This is a gecko that got accidentally trapped in amber 20 million years ago. And we call him Han Solo for obvious reasons. This is a hairy anglerfish, which is not someone you want to meet on a dark night, definitely. But he is rather wonderful. And if we actually take a look inside, you'll see that he's just finished a meal. In fact, there are two fish, one inside the other. So where do we go next? Well, whenever I look at anything, or anybody, I think of, yes, you, sir. I think of three things, right? Will you scan? What is inside? And what stories can we tell about your insides? Or anything for that matter. I want to pick a crazy example just to show you how outrageously possible all this is. Could you scan a comet 300 million miles away that is hurtling around the sun? Initial answer would probably be unlikely. Many of you may be aware that the Rosetta spacecraft, the European Space Agency program Rosetta, went into orbit around the Chury comet just a few months ago. And next month in November, a lander will land, hopefully, on the surface of the comet itself. The lander is called Philae, so watch out for the news for that, because there will be a lot about it. And in looking at the research for the TED Talk, I discovered that there will be an instrument on the lander that will send radio waves through the comet, which will be picked up by the Rosetta spacecraft on the other side, effectively creating a scanning system, which I find remarkable. And that means we're going to end up with a three-dimensional data set, which I would like very much to put on the table. So almost anything is possible using this technology. I want to return to the most amazing time capsules of all, and that is Egyptian mummies. And in particular, a mummy called Neswayu. He's 2,500 years old. He's a priest, Egyptian, and he is currently resident at the Mediterranean Museum in Stockholm. And we have CT scanned him for a project, combined that data with laser scanning, and also using photogrammetric scanning, which is taking lots of photographs to create a three-dimensional model. And we've effectively put him all back together again. And I just want to very briefly show you Neswayu on the table. So here you can see, as I zoom in, we can actually see from the side, beautiful detail. It's really like being in the tomb. And we can slice through from the side to see all the different layers. Just amazing. And here you can see that in more detail. And we can actually see the organs which have been repacked back into the body. So this is more of a traditional mummy. What I'll do here is just wipe from the side here. We'll take layer by layer by layer by layer. And finally, down to this level. And we found 130 amulets around the body, including one crafty little one that was hiding around the back. Now, one of those amulets caught our attention in particular. And what I'd like to do is show you the example of that. We use some high imaging scanning capabilities. This is a new technique which has been developed in Sweden to get extra resolution from the data set. So this is only about that big. And with that data, we were able to also ascertain that this golden falcon was indeed made of pure gold. So we printed it using 3D printing. in wax this time. And then we used the traditional jewelry manufacturing technique called lost wax process to create a new falcon. And I actually have one here. So here it is. This is the recreated falcon, digitally recovered from inside a 2,500-year-old mummy, unseen and untouched for 2,500 years without disturbing or touching the mummy itself. Now that really is touching the past. So I believe we really are on the verge of a new age of discovery. We can access the most incredible new technologies for medical imaging and 3D visualization. We can discover new secrets and tell their stories. We can also engage with some of the world's leading scientific minds and revisit those subjects which have been beautifully preserved, but they're largely undiscovered on the inside. But for me, the most important thing of all is that we involve you in this process. The curious and increasingly technically aware museum visiting public. And together, we can make some amazing discoveries and fire the imagination of a new generation. Thank you.